Hi there, and welcome. Thank you all for having me here at B-Sides Athens. As virtual as it is, I hope that next year we'll be able to do this in person. So I'm Dave Lewis, and my talk today is security debt and running with scissors, and we'll get into what that means in just a second. So I've been in security now for the better part of 30 years, and I have done pretty much every role along the way up to and including being a CISO for a power company. And I have always been of a hacker mind when I got started back in 1983. I hate that I can say that. I was really having a good time, duping video games, selling my kids in school, that sort of fun stuff. And, well, time has skipped ahead on us, as it always does. And now I'm a pretty much grizzled old graybeard and a rather frequent coffee drinker. And it's been interesting over the last couple of years during the course of the pandemic. I got into a couple of side ventures of being involved with a whiskey distillery as well as a soccer club here in Canada, and it's been really interesting to be able to try different things, even though we have been for a large part of it locked down. But now, hopefully, we are coming to a better place. I want to believe. I also would love it if this virus would just go away. So I am Canadian, so sorry about that. It is running joke here in Canada. And, we have to keep our wits about ourselves because, so many times we have issues that crop up and we often forget about the human element. So we have to be very cognizant that we are taking time to take care of our own mental health as well as those around us. So having a good laugh every once in a while doesn't hurt, because we have far too many soul-crushing meetings. And you know what? We have to be very cognizant of that because there are better ways to do things. And over the course of the last couple of years, we've actually found that we can be very productive as security professionals in this climate. So that has been a real bonus in that regard. So I myself identify as a hacker, and that means that, well, most of the world is not a big fan of us. Hackers, quite literally for me, is a term of someone with an innate curiosity about how things work, how we can take them apart and put them back together again. And the criminal side of things is something that I refer to as the attacker. So we have to make sure that we are owning our own lingua franca, because otherwise the media will spin it for us. So back many years ago, I got my first apartment back many years ago. And the first thing I did after my folks drove off, and it was just my roommate and I, is I grabbed a pair of scissors and I ran around the apartment. And my roommate thought I had completely lost my mind, and he wasn't too far from the right. You get me. So I just thought it was an ultimate act of rebellion, not taking into account that this could have been a rather unfortunate accident if I had tripped. And this is really how I like to frame security debt. Now, for me, security debt is a technical debt that has manifested as a security issue, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And it is very much akin to running around with a pair of scissors in your hand. Seemed like a good idea at the time. So we have to make sure that we're looking at how we're doing security in our environment. And, just because something's inside your firewall doesn't mean it's necessarily secure. Because I have worked in an organization in the past where that was actually said to me by a CIO. And the problem here was that, security wasn't part of the equation. It was a flat network. And the phrase that was said to me was that we trust everyone who works here, which is all well and good because, ransomware trusts everybody too. They trust us to make mistakes. Ransomware really is the debt collector for security debt, and we have to make sure that we are not making it easier for attackers to be able to get their job done. Another thing here, too, is, we all like to be environmentally friendly, which is a good thing, except when it comes to passwords. Now, I stole this from my friend Karen Elzari, and you know what? This is a great idea here, because we have to make sure that we are not recycling passwords. We are not reusing them on multiple sites, from our internet banking to, whatever it happens to be, because the attackers know this and they will go after sites and compromise them and then reuse those credentials to try and escalate their privilege. So we got to make sure that we are not making their jobs any easier. Because as a security professional, we always feel like this, or at least I do, and hopefully we can get to a better place so we are not feeling like this constantly. So when we're born into this world, we have to understand that we are defaulting to trust. Now, Malcolm Gladwell talked about this in his book, Talking to Strangers, that when we're born in this world, we are looking for food, we are looking for shelter, we are looking to be safe. And as a result, we don't have an innate understanding as to what it means to be, securing our environment and making sure that, attackers can't cause us undue harm. We are just reaching out and hoping for the best. Now, this does not translate into the modern world. And when I say that, from the perspective of computer security, we want to make sure that we are trust but verify and verify again, because we can't just accept at face value that someone is who they say they are. We have to make sure that trust is a absolute factor in everything we do, but it's established trust. Because trust is ephemeral. We want to make sure that we are not just saying, oh, I trust Frank because Frank is somebody I've always known, because Frank might not be Frank behind the keyboard anymore. Frank might have lost control of his own credentials. So we have to always keep that in mind. Because in the last couple of years, we've really seen that our security paradigm has shifted. Our threats are different. I've been very fortunate that I've been a home office user for many years. So a lot of this was old hat for me, but too many people have, really had a hard time adjusting. Because before the pandemic, we had folks that would say, oh, I'm going to work from home on Friday, which was code for, I'm going off to the islands or I'm going off to the cottage or whatever it happens to be in your respective jurisdictions. And it has really changed how we view the world. So in addition to the threats that we have to deal with, cats running across keyboards, dogs chewing through cables, kids tapping on computers when they shouldn't, we have to make sure that we also understand the human element, as I mentioned before, because the human element really does factor into security debt as well, because we want to make sure that we're being aware that people are in a different environment. They are really trying very hard to get their jobs done in a safe and secure manner. And they're worried about, how are they going to be able to pay their bills? So, attackers know this and they tend to prey on this using various phishing techniques and things to that effect. So we want to make sure that we're giving them tools that are going to help democratize security and keep them safe and secure at the same time. Because security debt, as I mentioned earlier, it's about for me, is a technological debt that is manifested as a security issue. And I really like to make that absolute distinction, because I have been in too many environments in the past where security debt really had become a wide open problem. OS2 warp systems running HVAC that were attached to the internet, all sorts of really odd things like that. An old Polycom device that was configured to access the internet using default credentials, and also with the ability to change that to allow SSH through it into the network. These are the kind of things that you might not think about at the time, but they do manifest as a security issue once the attackers find them. Absolutely, but we want to make sure that we're managing that risk to our environments. Because things like Heartbleed and Log4j, these are going to continue to happen. Because when organizations are using open source software, and to be clear, there's nothing wrong with the open source software, but they have to be able to manage the risk associated with it. Because at the time, Heartbleed's the SSL library was being used by e-commerce sites all over the planet. Like everybody was using it. But at that point in time, there was about 1.5 people dedicated to maintaining that particular library. Thankfully, that has been remedied and they are well financed and the rest of it, but it's just one example of many. There are all sorts of open source libraries that find their way into commercial software that may not be properly maintained. So we want to make sure that we are keeping on top of that and not introducing undue risk into our environment. Because there's different ways to handle risk. Do we avoid it, accept it, reduce, transfer? The thing here that really bothers me is far too often I see organizations just accept the risk. They sign it off and move on, and it's forgotten. That piece of paper ends up in a desk drawer, or it's filed off in some obscure part of your computer that you never look at again. And that's a problem, because there's also the piece, who is accepting that risk? Who has the ability to accept the risk in your organization? And what's your plan to deal with it in the future? Because things like this are going to continue to happen. I've seen this in far too many environments where a beige desktop was in production, running mission critical code written by a summer student that nobody knew how to port it off, and they couldn't afford to shut it down because it was running a critical function. This is just one example of many that far too many organizations have in their environments. Last couple of years, I've been doing CISA roundtables, roughly about one per week. And this has been a topic that has come up over and over again. These old deprecated systems that we're running that are not maintained, not patched, but it's okay because we have a firewall. It's an unfortunate notion that people put a little bit too much investment into the idea of a traditional perimeter. The castle wall, the moat, and all the rest of it. Really, that has been a deprecated notion for many, many years. We want to look at the access perimeter the perimeter is being anywhere an access decision is being made. And we have to be very clear on that. So just accepting the risk is not going to help you. It is going to buy you time, and it's usually driven out of a IT project. The project manager just wants to get to end of job, so they accept the risk, they move on, and the risk is forgotten. So this can't continue. Because when we're looking at it from a project-based perspective, there's usually no sunset provision for that particular project. So when that project is built, it could be meant to last for 3 years, 5 years, whatever it happens to be. But then in most organizations, it'll limp on for 10 to 20 years. And this is a real problem when they're not being patched, not being maintained, not being configured. The people who installed it didn't properly document it and have now left the company. These are the kind of things we have to make sure that we're keeping on top of on a consistent basis. And when you're looking at security in your environment, you want to understand what are those business priorities for your organization. Running around with your hair on fire saying, oh, this is really bad, has extremely limited utility. You want to look at it as, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve from a security perspective in order to satisfy the aspirations of your business. Fundamentally, that's it at its core. So if you don't understand what it is you're securing in your business, you're not just saying, the answer is no. You're going to put yourself in a bit of a disadvantage. So you want to make sure you clearly understand what the mission of your organization is so that you can best protect it. And from a business context, what is most important? What are they, like I was talking about, what are they trying to achieve? But we also have to make sure that, we're not negatively impacting systems or our environment. We have to be able to facilitate that conversation with the developers, with the business units, so that they don't just stand up an application and hope for the best. In the past, I was dealing with one organization who built out a web application and put it live, somehow bypassed security altogether, and the very first day it went live, they came to me and said, oh, we need a security review. Nothing like being timely. The problem here is the first thing I did was view source on the web page. And right there, commented out in the code, was the username and password for admin and password. I wish I was joking, but this was actually a thing. What was made it worse was the particular manager for that development team looked at me and said, "You've hacked our application." I had to take a moment's pause. That was a very difficult moment for me because I wanted to scream and pull my hair out, but that wouldn't have accomplished anything. I, at that moment, realized that there was a failure on my part and my team's part that we didn't clearly communicate to the organization what we expected from them from a security perspective. And they clearly didn't have any understanding of that. So rather than vilifying the users, I had to find a way to have that conversation to better impart what security issues we needed to take care of so that this didn't continue in the future. Now, we talked about project managers and how sometimes you would see, risks being accepted by the wrong people, but, within your own business, ask yourself this question: who has the ability to accept risk? Typically, it ends up in the C-suite, but not every organization understands that. And far too often, I'll see organizations that are accepting risk that are individuals that have no capacity or authority to accept the risk. One organization that I was at, and I left shortly after this, was we had done an entire vulnerability assessment of the organization, found absolute plethora of organizational issues, vulnerabilities, configuration issues. Imagine a flat network that spans the globe. And we presented them to the head of IT. Wasn't even the CIO, it was the IT manager, or director rather, for that particular part of the organization. And he said, that's okay, we'll just accept the risk. This was very, very difficult to wrap my head around at the time, because at no point was he doing anything to mitigate the issues. And it was really a trivial exercise for an attacker to breach that particular organization. I sincerely hope that they have long since fixed these issues, but it was not something that they were really keen to take a serious look at the time. So when you're looking at, the various security issues within your organizations, what those risks are, and when I say the risks, I mean it from quite literally an expectation of loss. If this particular system goes down, how much is that going to impact the business, and how is it going to impact the business? How can you quantify that, and how can you improve the process in order to make sure that those risks are being dealt with? So, do you have a risk register? Are you tracking these risks to end of job? Are you able to clearly communicate this to the auditors when they come calling? And wow, they come calling. Pardon me. Take a little water break. So we want to make sure that we have a clear, defined, repeatable process on how we can address this and reduce the risk in our organization fundamentally. Because if these risks are not addressed, over time, they compound. And when you add in new systems, add in new projects, over time, you end up with a layer of digital detritus that really can cause an unbelievable number of issues. And if an attacker is able to breach one system, all of a sudden they have the ability and capacity to pivot from one system to another. And we don't want to make their job any easier than it already is. We want to make sure that we are not allowing, these issues to languish. Because fundamentally, that danger does grow over time, and if we have a lack of action on our part, it just presents targets of opportunity, for the attacker. And when we layer in things like IoT, the risks explode. They are many and many, many issues that come with this. And I'm not talking just simply about consumer grade cruft of, the baby monitors and the wireless light bulbs and things like that. But, control systems that are being used to do manufacturing, to handle control systems for power, water, and so on. All of these things, if they are not properly maintained, we have a real problem. And there is an adversarial relationship that I've seen historically between OT and IT groups within organizations that handle these systems. We have to find a way to build that bridge to make sure that we're avoiding these security issues, because as these things crop up, they're going to add greater and greater levels of complexity for our systems that we need to protect. And we have to go through that lather, rinse, repeat. And as we add in multiple systems, that becomes far more difficult to address. We can't just be that flaming sword of justice that's running down the hall and saying, the answer is still no. And we have to make sure that when we make our slides, that the color of the letters on the slide are the right color so you can actually read it, which it says the flaming sword of justice. So that refers to somebody that I knew many years ago who really his answer to everything was no. And this does nothing to improve security for an organization. That's an old school dated approach. And it's really ineffective. If we are not taking time to empower the organization to help them better understand how to secure the environment, it's doing nothing to improve matters. Because that perimeter is not what it used to be. It's everywhere. Anywhere an access decision is being made. Because data breaches are happening, and they're happening all the time. And it really does seem in a lot of cases like, everybody wants one. So we want to make sure that that is not going to continue as a trend. Back in 2012, I started tracking data breaches, and there was a few here and there. I think the biggest one at the time was 6.5 million records, which was pretty huge back then. But nowadays, we're dealing with orders of magnitude of billions of records being compromised. We can do better. When we look at it and we see that a lot of the breaches are handled, or rather facilitated through weak credentials like QWERTY, password 123, things like that, vilifying the users isn't going to help. We have to give them better tools. We have to give them better ways to protect things. Because if it's a weak, unpatched device, that's on us. If it's a bad password, that's also on us. And I don't expect non-technical people to be computer savvy. So we want to give them something that is going to help protect their organization and make it as easy as possible for them to be safe and secure so they can, concentrate on their core competencies. Continuous trusted access is a great way to do this. I mean, some people say zero trust. I like it this way because A lot of times I've heard people spit on the floor when they say zero trust. Zero trust really is fundamentally about reducing risk. So if you say continuous trusted access, it's making sure that you're going through and approving all the users, devices, and applications on a continuous basis because, as I said, trust is ephemeral. This will help improve matters in the longer term. And you want to make sure that security is part of your mission overall. So just saying, you're one little security group running around terrorizing, people in your organization saying, do this or bad things will happen, isn't going to help improve matters. We want to make sure that security, it becomes part of the fabric, the DNA fundamentally of your organization. Because as a security professional, I shouldn't have to exist. This should be part of the overall structure. But again, going back to when we're born into this world, as Malcolm Gladwell said, we default to trust. And we want to make sure that we are helping organizations better understand this because, security people are a little different. We have to get away from the baling wire and duct tape approach to putting our systems together. We have to have clear strategies in order to get to that better place. And we do that through having clear and concise planning. You want to trust but verify within your organization. You need to establish trust in your user identities, devices, applications. We got to sanitize our inputs and outputs for our applications. I mean, SQL injection has been on the OWASP top 10 since the beginning. It's still there. Still one of the absolute biggest ways for attackers to breach systems. And we have to make sure that we're patching things. We can't just be worried about, the 0 days. I'm more fundamentally worried about the 100-day, the 200-day vulnerability that hasn't been addressed. That database service pack that has not been applied for 3 years. These are the kind of things that keep me up at night. So if we go through it and we look at zero trust or continuous trusted access, however you want to call it, it's about reducing risk. So fundamentally, you want to go through, establish trust in user identities, evaluate the device, look at enforcing policies and make sure that, Dave from Canada is not suddenly showing up in Mykonos attaching to your systems when I'm not actually on that side of the planet. These are the kind of things you want to make sure you're on top of. Securing the connections to all of your applications, because you don't want me sitting at a coffee shop here in Canada accessing your email systems when I don't work for you. And you want to make sure that you're going through all of that data you're collecting and looking for anomalies because they will continue to happen because attackers are going to always be looking for ways to get into your systems. So here's a real quick flow. User requests access to an application. We establish trust on them using, say, multi-factor authentication or passwordless. These are ways to do a better job of authentication. Looking at the trustworthiness of the device. Is it running Windows ME? In my web logs for my own site, I have actually seen that recently. It wasn't Windows, it was Windows 98. Somebody was trying to access my website, and I'm sure that was a horrible user experience for them. Enforcing policies on user device combination, make sure that Dave is in Canada, not in Mykonos or something, or Athens, for example. And making sure that you then build in a secure connection to the application. Once you've done all of that, go through and look for those anomalies. So if you take nothing else away from this talk today, I need you to go and look up WebAuthn. It is an open standard that really is about passwordless authentication. And this is a way to make it easier for the users to, access their systems. We want to make sure that we are making things that are going to democratize security, making it as easy as possible for people to get their jobs done. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way. The problem is putting those into action. We want to make sure that we are facilitating a better conversation because as security practitioners, we have really gotten to that place where we are now at the adults table. We're being taken seriously. So we have to make sure that we capitalize on that opportunity to better secure the environment by being a champion for the environment of our organizations to better secure them. There are a lot of problems out there, and we got to make sure that we're not worried about the sharks that are patrolling the waters. We got to look at the ocean. The ocean is really the bigger threat and often overlooked. We want to make sure that we're building a safe and secure future, and using multi-factor authentication, using passwordless, making sure that you are reducing security debt in your environment are all ways to better improve things because we don't need to cause ourselves problems. We got enough of them to contend with as it is. Thank you very much for having me besides Athens. Hopefully I'll be able to do this in person in the future. If you want to drop me an email at gattaca@cisco.com or find me on Twitter at Gattaca. It is truly an honor to be able to be part of this again today. And thank you and see you all later. Bye.